Welcome to the Luke Macias Show. I am coming to you from inside the Texas Capitol today. We are going to have a conversation with Representative Andy Hopper of Wise and Denton counties and one of his young female staffers. You're going to meet Claire here in just a minute. She's a resilient, wonderful, bright young woman who is going to just come on and share what happened to her a number of weeks ago when she was in the female staff bathroom and was approached by a biological male who made compliments of her, talked to her in the bathroom, and then left. And I really appreciate her just coming on, sharing the incident that happened. And then Representative Hopper will kind of go into some details about the actions he has taken subsequent to that incident to try to, one, make sure that young women who are staffers in the Capitol can go to the restroom and have a reasonable expectation of privacy and know that other men will not be coming into their bathroom and approaching them in any way. And so he has taken some action to try to get some answers. Honestly, we don't really have clarity. There's not clear answers as to exactly what's happening and who's handling this and how it could be handled. And so I'm grateful that Representative Hopper is willing to share that. You're going to see this conversation. This is, Claire is not in tears. She is not shaken up. That is actually not the point of the conversation. She's a resilient, confident young woman, but who's also willing to just share that this happened to her. And if it happened to her, it could happen to anyone. And so we wanted to bring this incident to light so we can at least figure out at what point young women in the Texas Capitol and really in the state of Texas can have an expectation of privacy, that when they're in these private spaces, they are not going to be approached by biological men. Let's get to the conversation. Claire, thank you for sitting down with me today. I want people to know how you even ended up in the Capitol. So you're 18 years old and you're from Oregon. So how do you end up in Texas working for a conservative freshman state representative?
Yeah, so my good friend Ella, who I've known since I was 5 years old, is his district director, and they had a position available, and she asked me if I'd like to come interview, so I did.
So you've kind of had some general interest in politics?
Yeah, throughout high school, I competed in the National Speech and Debate Organization, and then I also staffed with Teen Pack Leadership Schools.
Was that NCFCA?
Yes,
that you
it
did?
was. Yeah.
My siblings all did NCFCA.
That explains why they're in law now.
Yeah, they are. They're all smart. I was actually, my dad was a state rep at the time, so I was like working with him and doing other stuff my junior and senior year. So I didn't do speech and debate ever, but they all got into it right as I was like a junior in high school, and so I would go to the competitions and be like judges and
really,
and all that. Yeah,
that's so funny.
Absolutely, on all the stuff. So that's fantastic. You moved down here to Texas to work for the session, and very early in your time here in the session have a little bit of an incident. Why don't you tell me what exactly happened?
Well, I was in the bathroom, and in the bathroom they have a big mirror down like a hallway basically. So I was just like adjusting myself, making sure I look presentable to go back to the office, and he kind of just like walked down the hall, and I hear a big deep voice go, "Oh, I like your hair." And so we just had a conversation about his hair and my hair for a few minutes, and then I left.
So this is a man that walks in on you in the bathroom, and this is the woman's bathroom here in the Texas Capitol.
Yes, he had just finished using the restroom and was walking down to wash his hands.
You came back and told Representative Hopper what happened.
I told our chief of staff, yes. Yeah. But our representative was very interested, and he got back in the office.
Yeah. So you're from Oregon. And most people in Texas see Oregon as this like very far left state. So are you used to having men walk in on you in the bathroom?
No, this is actually the first time it's happened.
Oh, gosh. So being in that state, when you're there, because this is what I don't really understand. I've talked to various people that have these situations, but we say that women in certain places have an expectation of privacy, right? Yes. There's this understanding that in the current scenario I'm in, I believe that there are no men in that room. So what is it like when all of a sudden there's just a man in the room with you How did you, I know you've handled yourself very professionally in this instance, but what is that like when you're there?
Well, I found it kind of amusing, to be honest. I think I found amusement in the fact that it was very unexpected, and it was uncomfortable because, I mean, I don't expect to see a man in my private space. I would be happy to have that conversation anywhere else, but not in the restroom. So that was uncomfortable. I did find it kind of funny because I just felt kind of bad for him because it was obvious that he was going through things mentally and was trying to reconcile them through this new identity he's constructed. So I felt some pity, some amusement, and a lot of discomfort.
Yeah. Well, thank you for just being willing to kind of come forward and not only discuss this with your staff and with Representative Hopper, but here, I think it's important for the people of Texas to kind of know how some of these leftist ideas are still affecting even the halls of government. You know, this is where a lot of information. Now, I will ask you one follow-up question. Your understanding is that the person that confronted you in the women's restroom is a staffer in the Capitol. Is that correct?
Yes, I know who he works for. We shared names and everything, introductions.
Got it.
So yes, I know who he works for. I know that he is indeed a staffer. He was in the staff bathroom.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you for sitting down and talking with us.
Absolutely. It was very fun.
Yeah.
It's nice to meet you.
Very good to meet you too.
Yeah.
America is at a crossroads. Now, more than ever, Texas must step up and lead the country. We don't have time to mess around. The only way to save America is with a strong Texas. You and I know this, but so do the enemies of life and liberty. Therefore, you and I have no choice but to stand up and fight. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, and to the enemies of liberty, I say, come and take it.
Representative Hopper, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on.
You ran for office. You and I have known each other since you decided to run for office, which it took you several times to find a position that you could win. And you now show up here ready to fight for conservative principles.
Could you rephrase that? That is a really bad way to say it.
I thought it was
found
accurate.
a position you could win.
It took you a little while
to find a position you could win. That sounds really...
You started too high. So people don't know this, but some people know this. But you initially ran for state senate, right?
Yeah.
In this open seat.
Right.
And
that's the one that Shelley Luther ran against me.
Yes.
Yeah.
And destroyed you.
She absolutely demolished.
And so she destroys you. But we're all sitting there going, this Andy Hopper guy is really conservative, competent. He communicates well. And so you run for state representative 2 years later and almost win. In your first try, almost defeat an incumbent, more moderate Republican by 88 votes. Is that how much you lost by? 88. So you lose by 88 votes. And I will admit that like January, February, people would ask me about your race, the first one you ran. And I felt so guilty afterwards because I would tell people, like, I think he's going to get close. I just don't know. It's his first try. We'll see. And towards the very end, several of us were like, I think Andy's getting a lot closer than people think. And it just wasn't enough at the very end that pushed you over. So you come 88 votes short, but you're resilient. And so you decide to jump back in for one more try. And you end up winning by, what was the margin in your last election?
I think it was like 14 points.
Yeah. So a pretty wide margin. You win, you get here. Now, I know you have a lot of other conservative things you're fighting for with property taxes and eliminating state agencies and transparency and pushing back against the federal government. But within a couple weeks of being here, your 18-year-old staffer is confronted in a staff restroom by a man.
Not only is she confronted, like she is complimented by a male in her restroom who was standing behind her. And so I think she was pretty shocked. Like, she's from Oregon. She's the best friend of our district director. They're both 18. And so she's told me, she's like, this has never happened to her in Oregon. Yeah. And she comes to the capital of the reddest of the red state. And she comes in, like, there's a dude in her restroom. And so, like, you know, we're very protective. We promised her, you know, these moms of these two young ladies that we would look after them. So, I mean, I felt very, you know, called on just like, let's do something about this. And so immediately, you know, approached Chairman Metcalf, sent him a text and said, hey, Chairman, this is what happened. What can we do about it? No response. And so the next morning he came in and said, hey, it's handled. Did not elaborate how it's handled. And so we knew we were going to get committee assignments. So that was all going to change.
And I want to explain for people who don't know that Chairman Metcalf at the time of the incident was still technically chairman of House Administration.
Right.
It would have been considered. But the new appointments hadn't come out. So he tells you, I want to make sure it's clear. You send him a message. He doesn't respond, but he comes to you and says, hey, it's handled.
Right.
And you can't really get anything out of him as far as what that even means.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do women in the Capitol now have an expectation of privacy? Are men in the Capitol not allowed to go into women's restrooms? Like, what's the situation?
It's handled. It's handled. That's what we're talking. So, so that's kind of like how that flushed out. A few days later, committee assignments came out, and Charlie Guerin became the new chairman of House Administration. So, and by the way, this is like very nebulous for us freshmen. Like, who controls the building? Like, we didn't pass a housekeeping resolution, so it seems as though there's kind of autocratic, control of everything by House Administration. So I felt like we need a policy. So, I tap out a message to Chairman Guerin and say, hey, Chairman Guerin, like, here's the situation. I don't know if you're aware of it. This is what happened to Claire. This is really unacceptable, but I'm wondering, like, is there a policy that exists that we can point to so that we can give at least some confidence to these ladies in the Capitol, both staff and even visitors? Like, could we give them some confidence that this is not supposed to happen in the Texas House? And no response, but I did approach him the next day on the floor and said, hey, did you get my email? His response was interesting because he basically said, hey, we don't have a policy. We don't need a policy. He says, by the way, we don't control the bathrooms. And I reminded him, I said, but we do control the staff. Like, the House Administration, do you agree, is control of the staff? And he said, yes, that's exactly right. But he says, we don't need a policy. It's handled. You let me know. He says, if this ever happens again, I'm going to fire that. And that's interesting by itself, that first of all, one of the things I learned from that conversation is that House Administration feels that it can fire staff, which is fascinating to me. I think that people kind of need to absorb that because, I have a chief of staff or whatever, like I've hired that person. But that's an interesting bit of intel. And so, I basically took it from there and said, okay, well, he said the State Preservation Board is actually in charge of the facility. So let's fire off an email to the State Preservation Board and see if they have a policy. So far, we haven't heard from them.
So House Administration just yesterday passed this kind of blanket motion where the committee basically said, we're giving the chairman all the authority. And in it says House facilities. But what Chairman Guerin has told you is that the House facilities that House Administration has authority over do not include the staff bathrooms that House personnel are using. That's your understanding of their position.
Well, he actually disagreed that they were staff bathrooms. He says that anyone could use them. Now, it says staff only on the bathroom, and I'm not exactly sure how that sign got there, but he claims that the public could use them.
And that makes sense. I will be, charitable to Chairman Guerin. I mean, right. I've used those bathrooms. Other people I know that have come to the Capitol know that on this hallway there are bathrooms. Right. You can walk in. So there's not like a passcode that only staff have access to. And either way, there are some limited facilities that House Administration has. You mentioned the housekeeping resolution. There's been no vote on a housekeeping resolution. There was language being offered to make sure that any bathroom that the House does have oversight over is protected from biological men using the women's restrooms. Which bathrooms that is not clear. But the Preservation Board also, according to Chairman Guerin, might actually have the authority to decide if men can go into the women's designated restrooms in this hallway. And so you've reached out to the Preservation Board, but there is no policy by House Administration on whether male staff can go into the female bathrooms.
There is no policy, and the stated position is that they do not believe a policy is necessary.
But if the person that did it last time, if the man that walked into the restroom walks in again, according to Chairman Guerin, that person might get fired by House Administration.
That's what he said. And, the thing is that, like, the interesting takeaway for me is that, they are in control of staff. And while it's a theoretical problem, of course, that someone could enter the Capitol that's not a member of the legislature, it's not a staff member of the legislature, or is not a wife or a son or daughter of someone in the legislature, that it's just a person from the public, that yes, they don't have any control over that person, but let us agree they have control over staff. And like, this was a staff member that went in and was complimenting our staff member from behind in the restroom, which, we should definitely be able to put a stop to.
Yeah. Well, again, I know that this wasn't what you planned on spending your first several weeks on during your time. Since we're here, I will say this too. You have filed a number of bills. Why don't you just take a few minutes to highlight a couple of the bills that you're focused on?
Yeah. So, I'm a huge 10A guy. So like, a lot of the lens that I see things through is like, how do we make Texas more sovereign? How do we pull back some of the power? I think we should use every bit of the next 2 or 3, 4 years to, kind of regain a lot of the control we've ceded to the feds. And I think that's the way we can cooperate with President Trump, honestly, is by making the states, more capable to be able to meet the need. The next time we find our border invasion is being invaded by, illegals and cartels, like, we can take care of it. So I actually have a bill that kind of recognizes, the trauma and the tyranny that was exerted upon them by the federal government on January 6th of 2021. Is that basically says, hey, if you're a federal agent and you want to execute a warrant against a resident of Texas, that's the U.S. citizen, the key word, it'd have to be a U.S. citizen. You have to get the approval of the attorney general and the sheriffs. I've gotten a great response from that, because the thing is that it is actually state statute that lays out the authority of federal agencies to act as peace officers in Texas, which people are like, what? You don't innately have the power. The federal government doesn't innately have the power to act as law enforcement in the state. So, arrest illegals all you want, don't impede ICE in any way. But if you want to show up at somebody's house in an MRAP, you're going to have to get the approval of the attorney general to do that. Have another bill that's, actually, I couldn't believe the response. We've got joint authored it with Mitch Little and Shelley Luther and Brent Money. And, this bill basically abolishes the TEA, would abolish the TEA, give the responsibility to the SBOE, and all the fiscal responsibilities would go to the comptroller. I had no idea how popular this idea was. And I just really want to start a conversation. As Republicans, we believe in local government. And I believe that if we're going to pass a bill that, encourages the free market to work, and empowers parents to find the best educational outcome for their child, that, we should also unburden public schools to be able to compete in this market. Like, ones that don't compete, won't get students, and the ones that do, but at least don't put them into a one size fits all box. And so this was actually a popular idea, apparently. So yeah, we have a lot of bills like that. We have a couple local bills we filed.
You have been a proponent of smaller farming. I'm not an expert on all the language, but I know that's one of the things that you have been involved in and aware of. And so either policy other people are working on that you're supporting, or some of the stuff you're doing, can you tell people about some of that stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So, I think that, independence and self-reliance begins in, a rural setting. Like, if we want to preserve the consistency and the culture of Texas, like, even just defending it as a red state, like, we do not want to disincentivize in any way people living out there in rural areas to be able to do homesteading and develop it. I mean, no one's getting into farming. Like, there are no young people in farming, and that's a crisis. Like, this is the first year, I think, in history where, United States is basically getting more agricultural products to feed our populace from outside the country than inside the country. It's terrifying. It's diabolical. So there's a lot of things that we can do to kind of the rural healthcare problem is one of those things. A lot of folks, aren't going to live out there if they can't get a hospital. But I also recognize where I live, there's actually, water crisis, Parker County, same way, in Mike's district. There is not enough water. If you rank all the counties in the entire state by the number of wells drilled, Parker County is number 2, Wise County is number 3, and that's one of the counties that I represent. So I actually have a bill that basically says, hey, let's recognize that people are moving here, and it's just not acceptable to just not, be able to drill a well and just water acres and acres of grass. That's actually something people tend to do, because it turns out we do have a lot of farmers. They just know how to grow one crop. So it's just grass. So this bill basically recognizes if you have, a few acres and you maybe don't have enough to qualify for an ag exemption, as long as you just agree not to water the grass, that you get a property tax deduction. Let's incentivize you to do the right thing.
So I want to explain that to people. So what you're saying is one of the problems with our water crisis is that people will get 2 or 3 acres and they'll literally
water the
whole thing.
The St.
regularly.
Augustine. Like,
so they have this gorgeous lawn,
yeah,
which is causing major problems. And so
I was knocking doors in Paradise, Texas the last summer. It was like literally 112 degrees outside. And I'm just, sweating my butt off. And I go up to this guy's house and I'm like, dude, how many acres do you have? And he says, yeah, I moved here from Keller. He says, yeah, I have like 3 acres. It's great. And I says, it's so green. I said, how do you pull it out? It's watered right now. And he says, oh, well, the water's free. That's what he said. Water's free. So, I mean,
So your point is, instead of, you're not trying to mandate that this person can't water their grass, but say, hey, if y'all will stop watering your grass, we'll give you a deduction on your property taxes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which then allows for more water options for actual production.
Just agree not to water your property. I mean, we'd love for you to do something productive with it, like use it agriculturally, raise goats or sheep, all that's going to use less water than watering, a monoculture. But anyways, these are kind of creative ways that I think that we can, not disincentivize people from doing the right thing, but like definitely incentivize them. Also, believe that we should, abolish the 3-year waiting exemption on ag property use, because, once property loses its ag exemption, it never goes back. And so, I think there's lots of really creative ways out there that we can kind of, retain the culture of Texas, and just kind of incentivize people to get into small agriculture. Like, I'm on the ag committee, and I'm just really excited about some of the bills that are coming through that will encourage people to basically participate in small farming. Like, we tried to raise dairy goats, and it's like trying to sell raw milk. It's like, it's a crime. For the first time in human history, I have an animal and I'm milking it, and I can't actually sell what I actually collect legally. I have to go through, this process that is very geared for, large ruminants like cows. It's like, I don't need a big steel room that I can hose down to deal with, the feces from a goat. I need a broom and a dustpan. Like,
yes,
let's get rid of the regulation that kind of impedes small farmers from getting started, because no one's going to go buy 1,000 acres and get into large agriculture. That's not a thing. People aren't doing it. They can't afford it. So,
well, I want to thank you for not only trying to protect the females on your staff, but also being willing to confront lawmakers about this, talk to us about it, because I think the more Texans understand that these cultural problems we have are still prevalent in the state of Texas, the more they will be able to help, we will be able to create this awareness that often leads to these things being handled. Because right now in Texas, if you are a young woman, you cannot have an expectation of privacy, even in your own state capital. You cannot be assured that when you're in a facility where you're in some potential state of undress, that there's not a biological male there ready to compliment you, talk to you, approach you in any form or fashion.
It's diabolical. And if all places in the state that we would expect, our values and principles to be observed and recognized and enshrined in policies like this, I mean, it's, if nothing else, just let's say it's a bad HR policy to basically not have a policy on this, because like, what's the liability? Like, let's say that there's actually a crime that's perpetrated in that restroom. Who's in charge? Like, who actually is liable? Is it the chair of House Administration? Is it, like it's a bad situation not to have a policy that's stated on this matter. So that's really all we're asking for.
And the other thing that you mentioned that I think is worth at least bringing up is the implication by House Administration was that not only for a male staff that goes into a female bathroom, but the implication was that House Administration believes they have the authority to hire and fire your staff from serving you. And you don't even know what the limitation to that is either.
I'd love to know. And that's, that's kind of the part, like, we have been asking, like, why for the first time in a century have we not had something like a housekeeping resolution? What kind of power does that confer? Yesterday, I'm not completely up on the details, but there was a meeting of House Administration, and it sounds like that really the chairman has an incredible amount of power.
Yeah.
And that's something, like, the members, like, our people elect their representatives to go down here and like be peers and actually like represent their district in a real way, not to like wholesale relinquish huge amounts of power to administrative bureaucrats that are, not elected by the whole state. They're just elected by one district. So that's just not what people expect.
Thank you for coming on, Andy.
Thanks. I appreciate you.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Andy Hopper is truly one of the most exciting freshmen to have here. There's so many. It's kind of hard to say because there are so many freshmen that walking around the Capitol you meet and talk to, and all of them have shown up with a patriotic desire to see more conservative policy advanced in the halls of the Texas Capitol. And so we have an opportunity this session to get more wins on the board than at any time ever before, because the Texas House is so much more conservative than it ever has been, which is the blessing. And the real question is going to come down to how leadership operates. Dan Patrick had a fantastic quote just, I think, last week when he said, at the end of the day, it all comes down to what bills pass and what bills are killed. And then he said, I'm doing everything I can to make sure that Dustin Burrows is successful. And what the lieutenant governor, I believe, was communicating in that quote was he is here and the Senate has been primed to advance a lot of conservative policy. And if all of that conservative policy makes its way through the Texas House and is given its due consideration, and the conservative policy introduced by members on this side are given due consideration and move forward with the process and receive votes as they should on the House floor, then people are going to look back on this session and say it was a success. And if a lot of that conservative policy is gummed up through the delays that have been practiced so far, if that ends up leading to dozens of conservative policies dying on the 10-yard line, as they have in previous sessions, then I think Texans will be rightfully frustrated. We don't know which of those scenarios is going to come about. The good news is you have people like Representative Hopper who are here in the Capitol every day working to advance their legislation, working to support other people's policies. And I can just tell you that it is one reason why you should be encouraged about the potential for a lot of good policy to be enacted this session. May God bless you, and may God bless Texas.
Be sure to subscribe to Texas Scorecard on YouTube and click that bell to ensure you're a real Texan. If you liked this video and want to see more citizen-driven journalism, be sure to click like and go to texasscorecard.com to read about all things Texas. Texas Scorecard, real news for real Texans.